All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the fourth session. Today we're going to be talking about SBIRs and STTRs. So John, maybe a little bit of a review for you since you're in the writing cohort, but glad to see you here anyways. Couple of quick updates. Again, we will have office hours with John Chavez. That'll be April 1st from 2 to 4 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll go ahead and post the link in the chat if anybody is interested in those. They're in 30-minute sessions. And then I also wanted to ask, has anybody been working on a pitch that they want to present next week? Again, it's not mandatory, so you by no means have to, but I just want to get a feel of the room so we can plan next session better.
Yeah, I'd say possibly. I'm trying to catch up. I didn't get quite some of the syllabus items, but I've been working on a bit of a pitch deck. So,
okay, great. And you're welcome to, even if it's not complete or anything like that, you're still welcome to share it and get some feedback on it.
Sure.
All right. So with that, we will go ahead and jump into the material for today. We are joined by Cara O'Hare, and I'll go ahead and let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everybody. I am Cara. I'm at the University of Nevada, Reno. I run a number of our entrepreneurship programs here, but one of which is SAGE, our Sierra Accelerator for Growth and Entrepreneurship, where we are funded by the Governor's Office of Economic Development here in Nevada to support SBIRs and STTRs to our state. So I run a program that helps increase these numbers. So I can give you guys some background on what these two grants are and how you can go after them and kind of the right type of applicant. So SBIRs and STTRs. SBIR is a small business innovation research grant, and STTR is a small business technology transfer research grant. And these are put forward by SBIR.gov, but they are funded by about 12 different agencies to help startups and small businesses transform high risk, high impact technologies into marketable products and services that solve real problems. So the overall program goals are to support the R&D needs of the federal government, increase private sector commercialization, support technology transfer through STTRs, stimulate innovation. Really what we are focusing on in this program is to bridge the technology gap that we see that is traditionally universities or high-tech companies and startups. So there is something called the Valley of Death, and the Valley of Death is used in a number of different contexts, but in this case, if you're working on some research at the university and it has commercial potential, you're working on research, right? So when you're at the university, you're not in the business of making products, you're in the business of doing research. So if you want to turn it into a product, it's going to require a lot of R&D funding in order to get it to a point where people are going to recognize what it is. It could be on a website and it could be sold. And so you have this big gap where it needs developmental money to turn it from research into product. And so we have SBIRs and STTRs that sort of act as this federal gap fund, non-dilutive capital to accelerate your research into a product. So what does an SBIR firm look like? Here is an example of a company called Third Pole Therapeutics. They have developed a platform that eliminates the need for large compressed gas cylinders that generate nitric oxide and air and electricity on demand and on site. So they've eliminated the need for these large canisters at the hospitals by developing these on-demand systems. And this was something that was developed in Massachusetts alongside a hospital. And they received 3 phase 2 SBIR awards from the National Heart and Lung and Blood Institute, which is a National Institutes of Health, and they got about $5.4 million in order to turn this into a product. And this is important to look at these guys because when you want to work with the hospital and sell something to a hospital, It's really hard to break into that market, but working on an SBIR with them allows them to be a partner in the development of turning this into a product. So you're working with your potential customers. So it makes it easier to streamline that into the marketplace once it's become a product. So they've got $5.4 million in order to develop that prototype. And so that's money that didn't cost them anything to get. And they got a number of those grants to turn that into a product. Then we also have cognition therapeutics. I wanted to include a drug in this just so that you can see this is also something you can go after an SBIR or STTR for. This is developing a drug that could target the main toxin thought to cause Alzheimer's disease. These guys got $8.4 million from the National Institute of Aging through 11 different SBIRs and STTRs in order to go from concept all the way into something that can come through phase 1 clinical trials. So for both of these two companies, you can look at these SBIRs and STTRs as something that would really help you with that early stage R&D that you need in order to get you to the next step. So bridging that gap. So what is the difference between SBIR and STTR? The main difference really is the money, where money is spent and allocated. So with an SBIR, the small business gets a majority of that, and then they have an optional subcontract at 33%. With an STTR, one of those partners absolutely must be a research institution. And so these are the general breakdown that you see for an SBIR or an STTR. Now, in both of these, it's really important that the small business is still the applicant and the awardee. I know that there's some confusion sometimes about an STTR and whether or not the university applies, but in both cases, it's a small business, and we can dive into more of those differences here. So going over really the two differences between the two, besides the breakdown in the budget, you can see down at the bottom, the participating agencies is one of the biggest differences. So there's 11 agencies for the SBIR program, and then you have 5 in the STTR program. So the 5 that are in the STTR program also participate in the SBIR, but these 5 that are in the STTR, they exclusively operate with universities who are trying to do technology commercialization. And so this IP allocation agreement is required primarily in an STTR, although you do see it if you are working with the university in an SBIR. So the IP allocation agreement essentially says who owns what intellectual property, and that's very important if you are working with university IP and a small business. You want to just make sure that that's outlined up front, who owns what. And so, working with your technology transfer offices and then working with your sponsored projects groups to make sure that that is in place. The SBIR program is also older and larger than the STTR program, so there's a lot more money in that, and there's also, of course, the more agencies. So that's larger, and yeah, and then you can see kind of the breakdown of the work requirement here for both of those. So this is a really great table, and I'll send this out in my slides later, so you can just have this as a snapshot. These are the phases for NIH and different phases. So phase 1 is a feasibility study. It's about 6 months for an SBIR or 1 year for an STTR, about $150,000. This is your proof of concept, exploratory discovery phase. Phase 2 is more of your development. There's more money, but there's also more time spent in this phase. Phase 3 is sort of a, I don't want to say it's an unofficial phase, but there's not actually money associated with a phase 3. It's more like follow-on funds that come from other sources that get funded in the phase 3. So depending on where you are in your project, if you are in the beginning exploratory phase, you could do phase 1. But if you've already done that, you can actually skip phase 1 in what is called a direct to phase 2 project. Or you can just go phase 1 to phase 2. And so either option is fine, depending on where you are with your technical development. So how do you apply for funds? The main thing is that your company must be for profit, must be US owned and operated, manufacturing, and not manufacturing, but development must be done in the United States. Anything that is done under the project period must be stateside, and your company must have less than 500 people. The PI also needs to be a US citizen, but if you have other people in your company that are not US citizens, as long as they are not the primary PI, then you're absolutely fine. And then all of the work must be research and development. So they're not really interested in non-R&D work, so not marketing. Solicitation details. You want to look for the funding opportunity announcements. Here are a couple of links. The SBIR.gov/solicitations is and should be like a homepage for you if you're going to be applying for one of these, because they have a whole list of upcoming solicitations and a calendar that is really useful. That gives you an idea of what's coming up. And then you can click through these to see which ones are going to allow clinical trials or which ones have clinical trials that are optional. Each solicitation is a little bit different, so I encourage you to read through all of the details on that before you apply. Okay, I think I'm going to turn this over to Michael. Oh, you're muted.
So I am. All right. Let me get this up real quick. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, there we go. So yeah, now we're going to quickly talk about what actually goes into writing an SBIR or an STTR. They're not always the same. The components do slightly differ sometimes, but for the, is it taking down what I'm saying too?
Yes, I don't know what. I don't know if there's anything. I have no idea what to say about that.
Let me see if I.
Looks like captions are enabled.
Yeah. Might just do it like this. One sec. Let's just try doing it like that for now. All right. So the main components that are usually in every SBIR, STTR are the specific aims, the research strategy, the resources, the biographical sketch, research support, and preliminary studies and progress reports. So for the specific aims, it's a one-page formal statement of the objectives and milestones. Essentially, it's an outline of what you're going to be talking about throughout the entire SBIR STTR application. So you want to include everything about your project that's important and exciting without the detail. Oftentimes, if a reviewer is short on time and is going to just look over your SBIR STTR quickly, this is going to be their go-to page. And it may be the only section they read before scoring it. So you want to make sure this one is really well thought out, really clear, concise, and very milestone based. Once you have that done, that'll translate directly into the research strategy, which is the next section. Here you want to talk about the innovation. So what makes your technology different and why will it win? Whether that's, it solves the problem better than what's currently out there, or through a different method, has less side effects, whatever it is, you want to emphasize that. You can also discuss some of the historical data through a lens of commercialization for your product. And you want to do, again, notice this is a theme of a milestone-based format. You want to let them know kind of where you are, where you're going, and where you want to end up throughout the SBIR STTR process. Moving on to the resources. So the facilities to be used, what do you have available to you? Laboratory, clinical space, animals, computers, office space, anything like that. Essentially, you want to prove you have the infrastructure to manage a grant of this size. You know, the phase one is pretty small, but the phase two, a lot more money starts coming in. And if, you know, some universities allow you to work there, if that's not the case for your university, there is lab space through certain funding throughout most states that you can find. And then importantly, the NIH provides updated guidelines and outlines for all forms. And this is something I want to mention about kind of the entire process is, even though I'm going over a small description of what to expect, it's important to know that the RFA and the solicitations are going to be, you know, your main source for, especially for SBIRs and STTRs. They kind of tell you exactly what they want and what they're looking for, even to the point where, you know, it'll say like, we want to see X, Y, and Z in this way. And you will, you know, in your SBIR application, you'll state, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and here's how I'm going to do it. You know, you're just kind of restating what they're telling you to do in a way of saying how you're going to do it. So you always want to refer back to that RFA throughout the entire time. Oh, and another quick note on that, keywords and phrases as well. You'll notice that they repeat the same words or the same phrases over and over again, and you want to include those in your application. It's just, you know, the reviewer will look through the RFA and they'll pay attention to those keywords. And if you use those keywords, that's always just a plus to let them know you're thinking in the right direction. So next, writing resources. You want to discuss the ways in which the proposed study will benefit from unique features of the scientific environment or the subject populations, or will employ useful collaborative arrangements. Essentially, why is the environment you've set up going to be good or going to benefit this project? And in the scoring of them, this is called, or the scoring of SBIRs and STTRs, this is called the approach. So how are you going to get to where you're going? What resources do you have to help you get there? And is that, you know, will the reviewer think that's enough to get there? So you want to convince them that you have everything needed in order to successfully move from a phase one later on to a phase two and so forth with the resources you have. Next, we have the biosketch. This is essentially just a data dump of who is on or going to be working on the grant. So that includes personal statements, what positions and honors the people have held, peer reviewed publications. It's a little bit up to you kind of who you want to include in this. Usually it's high level key personnel. So you wouldn't necessarily include somebody like an intern who might be working on it, but you can if you want. The next is the preliminary studies and the progress reports. So this is going to be, again, just your scientific information, another data dump kind of. What prior work you have that's relevant to the project, the preliminary data, the experience, and all that kind of stuff to show them that you have the, you know, the groundwork and the framework to continue the research and development with the funding. So talk a little bit about how SBIRs and STTRs are different from R series. So contrary to R series, the review panel will involve both academia and industry experts. So you'll be judged both on, you know, again, that preliminary studies and the progress reports by scientific personnel, and then by your commercialization plan from the industry, which we'll talk about in a second. You need a strong value proposition and a CEO. Publications do matter in this case, and high impact is preferred. External validation, like letters of support, are always helpful to the application. They're not always required, but the RFA will let you know, if they're looking for letters of support, if it's optional, if it's preferred, things like that. The funding time is usually shorter. So from the time of submitting your application to the time you will receive funding is usually about 6 months for an SBIR STTR, which is generally shorter than an R01. And then it's important to note that there are funding gaps for SBIRs and STTRs. So you'll apply for that phase one, and that'll get you, like Cara said, That'll get you 6 months to a year, depending on whether or not it's an SBIR and STTR. And then you'll apply for the phase 2 and then the phase 3. And in between those times, there's going to be a gap of about 6 months from when you apply, or maybe a little bit longer, depending on what time of year it is and the application date, from when you'll receive the next funding. And it's important to note that although the success rates for a phase 1 are pretty small, it can be very hard to get. I won't say very hard, but it is hard to get and can require multiple attempts. But once you receive the phase 1, moving into a phase 2 becomes drastically easier. It moves from, I believe, about a 13% to a 50% chance. So it's really getting through that phase 1 hurdle, and then it becomes a little bit smoother from there on. But let's talk about the commercialization plan. So before I was talking about the research strategy, which is kind of the first segment. And then the next part is the commercialization plan. So all phase 1 applicants must address this. It's emphasized more in a phase 2, but it still has to be addressed within a phase 1. And within the commercialization plan, it's kind of what you would expect. You're going to explain your project's potential to lead to a marketable product, process, or service, and how you're going to get there, what resources you have that'll help you get there, and just the plan in general. And so Cara mentioned the direct to phase 2, which is also known as a fast track. I believe they're the same. Those are the same things, right, Cara? Just different terminology.
I'm not actually sure because I've heard 2 different things about that. So maybe, not sure.
Okay, we'll stick with direct to fast track because that's the one I've heard more. But so a separate commercialization plan is required for those that direct to phase 2, which is important to note if that's something you're considering. So commercialization plan is always 10 pages. It's a pretty strict deadline. They don't really look at anything past those 10 pages. So you want to make sure you stick to it. As you know, and it's just as important of a section as the research strategy is. They're going to look at it just as in depth. And the things you want to discuss are the strengths of the technology, the unmet need and the competition, which are going to be very important because in order to prove that your technology has a strength in a certain area, you need to prove that other things don't. So you need to talk about how there's a current lack in the space, whether that is, again, you know, maybe there is a treatment for it, but it's a lot of side effects and it's very uncomfortable for the patient to use, or whether or not the treatment that's out there just currently doesn't work well. And you need to discuss what other companies or institutions are working on or in that space. Then you want to discuss the current standard of care, the company expertise and structure, and a detailed path to the commercialization. And then lastly, we'll talk about some resources that can help you with this process. The first one, you want to talk to your program officer. That should always be your first step if you have any questions. And this will be within that solicitation RFA. There will be an email for the program officer for that SBIR or STTR who can answer your questions specifically for that SBIR or STTR. The next is the NIH Applicant Assistant Program for small businesses. This is a 10-week, well, it's important to note, it's not run through all institutions. So you'll need to check first whether or not your institution is part of this program. It's a 10-week coaching program designed to assist small businesses in preparing for that phase 1. Things that it covers are needs assessment and mentoring, assistance with required registrations, application preparation support, and application review. And we'll be sending out this PowerPoint, I believe tomorrow. So if you're interested in these links, it'll be there. The next is what's called the Discretionary Technical and Business Assistance Program, known as TABA. Essentially, you get some small funding through the program to use for a variety of services. So that can be assistance with product sales, intellectual property protections, market research, market validation, and development of regulatory plans and manufacturing plans. You'll notice neither of these actually helps in the writing process, only the review of the application itself, or some of the parts that go into it, like the market research and market validation. So that is something that you are more responsible for. However, through New Mexico State University, we do offer a 12-week writing cohort about once a year. We are currently running that program now. It's coming towards the end of it. It usually starts in February for the April deadline. So if that is something you're interested in, you can always get in contact with us and we'll let you know the next time we are running that cohort. And that takes you through, the entire process of registering for everything and getting the correct registrations to actually writing it, getting one-on-one assistance, all the way up into that point where you apply for the deadline. And with that, I'll ask if there are any questions.
I just want to add that that TABA money is after you've been awarded. So, and that's in addition to your phase one money. So if you've gotten a successful phase one, then you can go after TABA money to tack on top of that to help you actually execute your commercial plan that you put in your phase one application. So TABA is a relatively new program, and I think that it's money that's really untapped. So if you need help with that, and you can either work with a big company institute like the LARDA Institute for TABA, or you can actually pay your local businesses using TABA money if you need assistance with setting up your business stuff after you've received a phase one. So just wanted to add that to that.
Yeah, thank you. I did forget to mention that. And yeah, so any questions about the differences between the two, the process, anything like that?
I have some thoughts or questions kind of building on this TABA program. And last week, I think you mentioned the I-Corps program and a couple other programs, and those are all only available if you have received an SBIR award. Is that correct?
So not the I-Corps program. The I-Corps program is, it's a resource ranging from anywhere from like students to faculty. And that's just essentially a preliminary market research and market validation tool for you to use. So you'll be broken up into teams within the cohort for your specific technology. And that team will just throughout I believe it's a 4 or 5 week course, month long, however many weeks are in that certain month. But it'll take you through that process and kind of give you some preliminary data. A lot of people who've gone through that program and then gone to apply for an SBIR, STTR said it was quite helpful for that, market research area and competition, unmet needs, things like that.
Okay.
But the TABA program is, like Cara said, for after.
Yeah, I would say if there's a timeline on this, then, and if you are starting out with just a research concept or just an invention, I would do I-Corps first, gather your team, do a local program. So, they've got like institutions and then nodes. So, go to your regional program. If you are pushed on from there, you can get $50,000 in the nationals program. You get $50,000 to do customer discovery in that. And that one I think is a 6-week program. I don't know what your regional one is. That one could be a different length, but if you make it into the national one, you get that 50 grand to do that. Then the end result is you get a commercial plan that you can plug into your SBIR application. So then do your SBIR, get your phase one, then go after TABA, then do a phase two. And that's one way you can do it, but that's kind of a general order.
Okay. Yeah, I asked that because one of the program managers had sent me some packet with some of this information. And one of the things he pointed out the TABA, and then he pointed out 2 other programs, the C3I program for NIH, which is Sports Medical Device Innovators and Commercializing Their Products through a 24-week entrepreneurial training course.
Oh yeah, I've heard of this one. So there's a couple of different I-Corps, but the primary I-Corps a lot of people know about is the NSF one. NIH came out with their own I-Corps. And then there's this third one that came out that is I-Corps-esque that you can go after you've got a phase one. There's less known about that one because it's still a relatively newer program. But that might be what they're talking about. And so they just want to encourage you to do some commercialization training if you got a phase 1. So that's probably what that is.
Okay. So the one you're talking about before, that's the NSF?
Yeah, that $50,000 one, that's the NSF. But I know that there's an NIH, it's called NIH or I-Corps at NIH.
Yep.
So there's that one too.
Okay, yeah, so the I-Corps by NIH, that's one if you have an award. NSF, you don't need an award.
Right.
What you can do it is to help develop your plan. And then there's the C3I program for NIH, which is specific to medical devices and the 24-week training course.
Okay, so that one also I think is after that's the one that you do after you've been awarded.
Yep, both those for the NIH say you need to have an award.
I thought the NIH at I-Corps, you didn't need to have an award yet. I thought that was it's not?
I just look at the PowerPoint and said to me, I'll look over here and see.
That may be something new, because last year we did send some of our researchers who had not received funding yet to that program.
Okay.
So that's interesting. It may be on like a need basis as well, depending on how many people they get who have received the funding.
Yeah. I-Corps likes to change the rules on us every so often, so I'm not sure.
And that's why I asked, because it seemed like it'd be a better pre-submission program than it would be a post-submission program. So I was exactly the clarification I was looking for, why this would have to be a program that's you only accept to once you already have the award. I think it's a little late by then.
Right.
Yeah. I think that one you're thinking of. There was another one that I thought it's called like startups at NIH or boot camp or something at NIH. It's for successful awardees who want to go through a boot, like an I-Corps-esque thing. But they have so many variations of I-Corps now. So
it's lots of programs.
Yeah, it's all great though.
Okay, C3 I-Corps NIH.
Yeah, it's all based off of the lean methodology that was pioneered by Steve Blank. That's the lean startup methodology. They use the business model canvas and the value proposition canvas. So if you want to get an idea of what all of those programs are about, I would just watch a couple of videos on YouTube about the business model canvas and the value proposition canvas. That'll give you a great background on pretty much how all of those programs work.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm interested in is taking advantage of free training, right? So if they're offering training, I want to try to sign up for it. And if it's going to improve my chances to get funding through a grant, I want to participate in that as well. And so finding the ones that prepare me for funding versus the ones that I can be involved in after I already get funding. I'm not necessarily as interested in learning more entrepreneurial skills once I have a bunch of funding to start working, right? I think you should have, isn't that how you're evaluated, whether you're ready or not for funding?
Yeah, well, I mean, in these programs, they don't just give you free training; they actually give you money to be trained. So, and then that's what's cool is this, like, for the NSF one, they give you 50 grand, but you're not supposed to spend it on any product development. It is only to understand the market. So that's really different from the rest of the money you're going to get. So SBIRs and STTRs is, R&D money. You're going to use it to build up your product. But this $50,000 is just funding things. It's going to get you a conversation with somebody. So going to conferences, maybe a mentor. But that's what they're really trying to do is they're looking at, you've kind of got these two pillars in your business. One is your technology and the other one is the market. And you've been building up this technology. You kind of got a lopsided business. You need to bring the market up. And so that's what this is like, putting all the money into building this up so that you've got this structure that's going to be good going into an SBIR or STTR.
That's a great explanation. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a question. When you go back to your examples earlier, like that first company I remember had 3 SBIRs and the other one had 11.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
At first I thought surely it's not on the same product, but maybe not. How was that? I was a little surprised, right? Because I thought you put in your proposal, this is what you want to get done, and they assume that you're going to get everything done, but you're getting multiple SBIRs, phase 2s.
Yeah, so I can try to explain this, and then Michael might have a better way of explaining this. But from what I understand, the project is sort of broken up into different value propositions or assumptions that they're testing. And so each thing that they're testing is a new project. So like there are lots of different components to something like this. And so each prototype, each thing that you're doing a proof of concept on, that's its own proposal. And so sometimes you'll do one main one, you'll do your proof of concept, you'll establish whether or not it's worth doing. And then you, instead of moving on to phase 2, you decide, you know what, that wasn't right, I'm going to start over. Or maybe there's a different variation of this, or there's a complementing type of product or feature that I would like to focus on instead. So you kind of have like this iterative thing. So you might end up going back to phase 1. So you see in a lot of cases, or in some of the cases I've been looking at recently, where you have like 11 phase 1s and then 3 phase 2s, right? So because they've sort of done this iteration in the beginning and then they moved on. But that's just from what I've seen. I don't know, maybe Michael, you've seen something different, but that seems to be what I've noticed.
No, I mean, that's same thing I've seen. I can use an example. There's a researcher out of Fairbanks, Alaska, that we worked with. We helped her apply and get phase 1 funding. And then through that phase 1 funding, she figured out that there's a better way to do it. And so she went back and she, instead of applying for a phase 2 with the current technology she had, she kind of tweaked it a little bit and she went back to the phase 1 and applied for that. So like Cara said, it's kind of, you might hit it right the first time, you might decide you want to try it over. It really depends. And I know if you've already applied for the phase 1 and gotten it for a certain technology and you're applying again for a very similar technology, your chances of getting it go up since you've kind of already proven that you can do that. I don't have the numbers on that one because it's a little bit of a obscure one, but essentially you're just kind of developing your technology, and sometimes that requires you to start over a little bit with new funding.
Yeah. And then I put this in the chat while you were talking, Michael, but there is a difference between direct to phase 2 and the fast track. And it has to do with, fast track is actually combining phase 1 and phase 2. So you need to be able to explain that I'm going to spend 6 months of the first project plus the 12 months of the next project, where I'm going to be doing the prototype proof of concept, and then I'm actually going to start developing it. So that's sort of a fast track example. Or direct to phase 2 is I don't need phase 1 because I've already established that proof of concept. So I'm already ready to move into the development of it. So I'm just going to skip phase 1. I'm going to go straight to phase 2. So there are all these different types of situations depending on where you are, your technology, where you are with your company, where you want to move forward. And so if you go on the SBIR.gov website, there is like a whole training section, and they'll show you all these like smaller ones that are lesser known, like the direct to phase 2 and fast track, because most people just look at phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but there's all these like little mini ones that are kind of stuck in there. So I would recommend checking out that training videos on that.
And I also do want to mention, because this came to mind, I'm posting a link in the chat. The NIH has a lot of example SBIRs and STTRs. So if, I kind of went over a short description of what's expected from them, but not what it actually looks like. And that gives you, shows you grants that have been funded in the past, everything that was included in them, from the research plan to the commercialization plan. So that can really help you just get an idea of it. And actually, so Ascend is actually funded through an STTR. And that, we had to reapply, and that really helped us through that process, was looking at that to get an idea of how to format it.
I think another good resource, if you're just trying to see how companies are approaching this, just go to the NIH reporter, right? And you can see the abstract that they provide, but still you see their history and all the PIs that are involved in their programs and how many projects were awarded. And it seems I found multiple companies that have dozens of these SBIR, STTR awards, whether they be phase 1, phase 2, or the commercialization, fast track ones, or all these little, you mentioned little, I don't want to call them baby grants, right? But these other little spin-off grants or something.
Yeah. And besides the reporter's a great website. But if you also want just sort of general stats to see how the program is for your state, the SBIR award section on SBIR.gov will show you, like, you can do a whole Excel export, and it'll show you who's been awarded around you, how much they've received. So some people may choose to partner with somebody who's more successful, that's just had, turned out a bunch of them. Or you may just want to talk to somebody in your state for advice who's been there, done that. But the SBIR.gov award search is just a great tool. I use it to see how our state is doing on our numbers all the time. So it's good. And I think they show the abstracts and the award amount and all that stuff. So it's good.
So I wrote another question over here, or at least some comments about the difference between phase 1 and phase 2. You mentioned the commercialization plan. And you mentioned phase 1 that you just need to address it or touch base on, if you will, in the research plan itself. And I think you're saying, you're just going to say, yeah, we have a commercialization plan. It's kind of rough. Our plan is to do feasibility, test, create a prototype, and go commercialization. And the goal of phase 1, right, is to test feasibility so that you can develop a prototype that you want to go through commercialization. But then you say phase 2 is really about the commercialization plan. Will that also include a new research plan in addition to a commercialization plan, or is this one document at this time where your additional prototype testing?
So your phase 2 application should include the results of your phase 1. So yeah, what traction did we make on the product, on the market? What have we learned? And then using that to apply for your phase 2. That's why when you do just a direct to phase 2, if you didn't get a phase 1, then you're going to have to pull those results from somewhere else. So like just experience that you have gained on your own of doing a market assessment. And the commercialization plan really is, it depends on the agency, but the main purpose is that they want to make sure you're not just developing research for research sake, like that you have an intention to move this into the market. And it's not enough to just say, the market, like 90% of the world owns iPhones, therefore my market is 90% of the world. Like it needs to be like really well thought out. Like, these are the potential customers. This is how I plan to acquire them. These are the people I'm going to partner with to manufacture and then to distribute. So it needs to be actually detailed and thought out that you are going to take this out into the world. It's not just some canned report that you've put together that says the market's growing at 10%, because they can really tell. And so I would say that you're doing commercialization in both phases, but in phase 2, it tends to look a little bit more sophisticated based on the results that you've developed in phase 1.
Okay. So when I'm thinking about these multiple phase 1s and then this maturation to phase 2, and the goals of these two plans, right? Because I think of phase 1, and I keep hearing the word feasibility testing, right? Feasibility testing could be described in a million kinds of ways. And I see some of these projects that, feasibility, I just want to show that this molecule is active, for example, and that's within scope of a phase 1. That's not going to get you to phase 2 though, right? That may be a small part of the feasibility testing within a larger project. So is it expected that a phase 1 will lead to phase 2, or is it expected that you'll eventually get to phase 2?
They want you to go from phase 1 to phase 2, but it also depends on how you write your plan up. So yeah, Michael, do you have anything you want to add to this?
So yeah, I think like you said, you're trying to they expect that you're going to do a phase 2, but again, it's the feasibility study to show that you can get to phase 2. So it's not always going to work out.
Phase 2 isn't always work out, or phase 1?
Sorry, the phase 1 might not always work out, right? You might not get the results you want. Things, your research might show something else. Like we said, and that's sometimes why people start over again. So they want you to get to that phase 2, but they understand that, you might need to repurpose it. You might need to reformat it in order to get there.
Yeah, I would say phase one's a lot of, it's kind of the exploratory phase.
Mhm. With that being said, a lot of people do move, it's less common to redo like a phase one. More times you see it, they do the phase one, things work out well enough that you can just move to a phase two from that.
Mhm.
It's only if you really find out you need to change something was fundamental and kind of start from scratch that you go back to that phase one. Otherwise, you can just usually move through.
You know what might be helpful is I'm including a link here of success stories. So if you want to see how people use their SBIR phase ones and phase twos, because they're different depending on the agencies they have applied for, depending on their product concept. So, these company stories are great because they give you sort of a profile on how many awards they've received, how much money they've received, what it took for them to go from concept to market, and the different industries they're in, because you can also just have a tough industry to break into, like defense is notoriously tough. So, I would recommend looking at these sort of success stories just to get an idea. Cool. Do we have any other questions?
You look like you're pondering, John, but is there anything else?
I'm rethinking my strategy here, right? You know that I'm working on an SBIR.
Right.
Right. And so I've submitted my one pager, specific aims to the program managers and got some feedback. And they're notoriously vague, but constructive at the same time, right? They're going to say, yeah, this is the right time. I think let's go to this agency. Here's some general feedback and things to look at. And
Right.
so I'm been balancing between these concepts, right, of feasibility and prototype, right? And you get the feedback that, hey, phase one has to be entirely 100% funding for research and development towards building a prototype. Okay. And then we say phase two is a commercialization, needs a commercialization plan. And your goal is to bring this to market with successful completion of phase two. And that gap between building a prototype in biotechnology and having that prototype ready for market is pretty huge. At least,
Right.
And so I'm thinking, like, how do I fill this gap? I'm going, I got a prototype. If it needs to go through clinical trials, I'm not going to initiate preclinical after phase one feasibility, right? And I'm not going to be ready for commercialization unless I can include, I guess, the SBRs that do allow clinical trials. And that's, anyway, all that's running through my head. And I got a grant, it's going to go in regardless. So I'll learn something from somebody.
Well, so I'll say a couple of things on that. The first is, right, you mentioned there's going to be a gap between the periods of funding. So sometimes what we've seen before is during that gap before they apply to the phase two, they take a little bit of time to get some like funding from angel investors or something like that to do a little more by themselves.
Or TABA.
Yeah, or TABA. And then also, it's not always, I guess, yes, the purpose of the phase, the end of the phase two and getting to phase three is to have something that's commercializable, but it doesn't, I guess it's hard to explain because yes, they want it to be something that's commercializable, but you're trying to show them that you worked up to something to that point. So, right, it's kind of a process through it and past it, kind of. It's not necessarily like after that point, there's a hard stop, you have to have it done and everything's like that. So it's
yeah, I see. Not being evaluated on whether or not you can get this in the market and get on the shelves, but you have to have a plan so you're thinking all the way through. That way, if you do need to reinitiate a project, you probably reference your commercialization plan and the gaps you need to fill there.
Right. Show them you're capable of getting it to that point. And of course, yeah, two years is not enough to commercialize a product entirely, but show them you've thought it out, you have all the pieces, and you're ready to take on the challenge.
Okay, I think that does help me quite a bit. I think what I hear you saying is your commercialization plan, maybe it isn't a 2-year plan, right? But you're still going to submit a commercialization plan with the project, and this project should just move you along that commercialization plan. And
right. So you kind of want to tell them where you are, where you're going to get with the funding you have, where that's going to take you to, and then next steps after that.
Okay. that clears that up for me. That's a helpful separation between, the company's goals and the project's goals.
Right.
Right. And of course, you don't want to go too far to that side and say, oh, we're not going to get that far with your funding and a lot's going to come after that. You want to, balance it out a little bit.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really important differentiation. So the project, commercialization, I think you would want to think about this on a long-term horizon, not just within the confines of this project. And you would talk about, 5-10 years, and talk about large milestones that you want to achieve and how this is going to help you get to some of those beginning milestones. And then you can think about going after additional phase 2s to go after those other milestones. So this is where you can start applying for a lot of these grants to sort of fill in the gaps in your commercialization plan. And you can talk about how you're leveraging your previous funding to do that. One company I would recommend looking at is the LARD Institute, which I put the link here in the chat. They are great for strategy for your SBIRs. They have a roster of consultants that are funded by TABA funding, and they would be able to help you really figure out some of the detailed stuff in your application and your commercialization plan.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else?
That's it.
All right. Awesome. So I'm not sure, Faith, in recording this, do people have access to the links we posted in the chat?
I actually have copied and pasted every single link we've put in with some notes to be sent out in our emails. So I don't know if they have access via the record. Even if they did, I think they'd have to pause the video and type it in manually. So I have that going out to everyone.
Okay, well, yeah, for those who will be listening on the recording later through the program, Faith will send out those links if you're interested in any of those.
Oh yeah, John added here in the chat that some states have SBIR and STTR matching grants. Thank you for bringing that up. So you can actually find, let me see if I can find the link for it, but I would look up phase 0 support for the different states, and then the STTR, SBIR matching programs. And the state funds will actually match the funding that you receive. And I think that's also, I don't know how that plays into TABA, but I will find that link and I'll send that to you guys.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, Cara, if you just want to send that to me, and I'll send it to Faith, and she'll include it in the links that we send out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just a quick note to our current attendees. We have a YouTube private playlist that we're going to be sending out in the upcoming email, and it's a recording of today's session and the last 2 sessions. So if you guys are trying to remember something and you didn't take a note for it, you'll be able to access it that way. So I'll be sending that out pretty soon as well.
Right. All right, and on that note, that concludes today. Next week, we'll be diving in a little bit deeper to pitch decks. So if some people have prepared them, we'll kind of do those first and give some feedback. If there aren't any prepared, which again, it's not mandatory, so that might be the case, we'll just go over a little bit deeper of what an actual pitch deck looks like, not just kind of the shorter version we were giving you guys at the beginning. Go over an example of what a good pitch deck looks like. That's help another company we've worked with receive some funding, and kind of walk through those steps. So everybody have a great day, and we'll see you next week.
See y'all next week. Thank you, Cara.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.